Reverend Bonnie, as you know, Bonnie, most of you know, that in case some of you didn't know, but Bonnie used to speak very much at Unity, all the time actually. That's how I met her. And she started out in La Jolla, California, and I'm not going to go through the whole trek because it's kind of a long one, but she came to Las Cruces from Albuquerque, and we're so glad she did. And I'd like to thank you, and we'll repair this issue of you not having spoken here yet in the future, if it's okay. So let's welcome everybody.
Okay, well, good morning.
Good morning.
I didn't speak there all the time, but I did speak there quite frequently. And some of you might know that Reverend Terry has been my prayer partner since I moved here in 2006. And so Unity has always had a very warm place in my heart. In fact, you cushioned me, I'm going to cry, for the 6 months after I dealt with my mother's passing. I was with you all. So anyway, I didn't mean to do that. Thanks, Tanya. So in order to open today, and we're talking about the continuity of life. I don't know if this is actually, is this picking up? Okay. The continuity of life, life everlasting. I have a reading from Charles Fillmore and then one from Ernest Holmes to set the tone for what it is I'm going to be speaking about. So the information that I found on Charles Fillmore is, this one is from Keeping a True Lent. And he said, first of all, well, how long it will take to transform the mortal into the immortal, no one can tell. We do know, however, that once the mind receives the Christ quickening, it will continue to grow in grace, incarnation after incarnation, until the rejuvenating life has overcome death and reincarnation is no longer necessary. Now, I got all of this off of truthunity.net. So if you're interested in more of what he had to say, I found a lot of things on that website. You might already know, everybody's shaking their head. I didn't know about it until I did this research. Ernest Holmes has an entire chapter called Immortality, and this is from that chapter in the Science of Mind text. He said, the average person desires to live beyond the grave. The average person desires an eternal progress, an everlasting expansion, a complete reconciliation between this life, the grave, and everlasting existence. Even the best of us feels that our lives here have been marred by incompleteness. 9 out of 10 people believe in some kind of immortality, which demonstrates that people not only wish to believe, but that in the face of all difficulties, disappointments, and disillusionments, they actually do believe. With all these facts confronting us, we should learn to trust life. There is no power in the universe which wishes ill upon anyone. Life is good, and God is great. Why not accept this and begin to live? No one need prepare to meet God. We are meeting God every day and each hour in the day. We meet God in the rising sun, in the flowing stream, in the budding rose, in the joy of friendship and love, and in the silence of our own soul. And he concludes this whole chapter. And so we prepare not to die, but to live. The thought of death should slip from our consciousness altogether, and when this great event of the soul takes place, it should be beautiful, sublime, a glorious experience. As the eagle, freed from its cage, soars to its native height, so the soul, freed from the house of heavy flesh, will rise and return unto the Father's house, naked and unafraid. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. So, where have we been and where are we going in a world that says, be here now? Has anyone heard that expression, be here now? You've all heard that. Well, we're taught that to be here now allows us to have a happier life, a more centered life. And so if our goal is to be here now, why do we ask, where have we been? Why do we take time to study history, to learn about our genealogies, to honor our ancestors? I brought my Dia de los Muertos skull. And at the same time, why do we ask, where am I going? Why do we take time to work on manifesting and praying to see things manifest in our future if we're to be here now? And why do we care about what happens between now and when we pass, when we die, or what happens after we die if we are being here now? When it comes to concerns about the future, I used to believe that everything I did now was going to find its reward in heaven. Kay's nodding. This was my understanding of how it worked. And so I spent a lot of time working really hard on doing a lot of good things that people didn't know I was doing, so I'd get my reward when I got to heaven. I would choose my behaviors. This started in high school. I was very conscious about choosing my behaviors, picturing that reward in heaven. And then I met New Thought. And in New Thought, of course, I read Holmes, the Fillmores, a lot of other teachers. And the focus got shifted back to now. It got shifted back to what's happening in my life now, and how am I creating heaven right here and right now. With some of those teachings and ideas of as above, so below, right now. The focus was on thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And so as I researched what Holmes and Fillmore had to say about the continuity of life and the idea of life everlasting, I was actually surprised because this was the first time I found some slight differences in their teaching. Just slight, but I didn't realize that this was what I would find. So Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore both believed in reincarnation. But like I said in the first one, they believed that it only was going to take place as long as it was necessary. And here's what Charles Fillmore believed all the way up until he passed at age 92. He said, I should never pass out of this body. I expect to associate with those in the flesh and be known as the same person I have been for 92 years. But my body will be changed in appearance from that of an old man to a young man with a perfectly healthy body. I do not claim that I have yet attained that perfection, but I am on the way. And he said that just a few days before he passed. He also wrote that death is caused by man's failure to comply fully with God's law, and that the abiding consciousness of life fills every cell in the body with its quickening energy, and that's what makes the body become immortal. So that's what he was trying to achieve. And so he passed in July 4th of 1948, and there was concern that because he had said that all the way up to the end, that somehow Unity might not survive his passing. But they said the very next day, life went on at Unity Village, and you are here today to show that Unity did continue, and the teachings did continue. So I talked to Reverend Terry about it. I said, I didn't know that this is what Charles Fillmore taught. Ernest Holmes teaches that everything that we pray for, everything that we seek to manifest, has to work within natural law. And so he saw the physical being working like all other things in physical or in natural law. So it has a time when it ends, but the spiritual aspect is what continued on into eternity. And so Reverend Terry said that the thinking today is that just because Charles Fillmore wasn't able to demonstrate that, it doesn't mean it still isn't possible. So it's still a concept to attain. At the same time, the Unity teaching tends to be more in line with we drop the physical and the spiritual is what lives on forever. So I'm one of those that says, well, either way, what's really important here is the idea that our spiritual entity, that essence of who we are, does have a continuity to go beyond the grave, so to speak. What this also did for me was help me to understand a little bit more about my own personal experiences around death. Reverend Terry also let me know that the Fillmore started out as Christian Zionists, and I didn't know that. So they had started out, actually, she said there's some kind of a certificate that makes it look like they're actually ordained, not just practitioners, but ordained in Christian Science. And then they went on to found Unity. And my parents come from households where the parents, my grandparents, on both sides, were Christian Zionists. And so as I read what Fillmore said, I got a better understanding of what it was I experienced as a child. In my family, when someone died, I felt like people felt embarrassed about it. That somehow they felt like it was a sign of defeat, like they hadn't quite succeeded at what they were supposed to demonstrate in their life. So now I understand where that comes from. This idea that they were wanting to be so in alignment with Christ consciousness that they became immortal in the physical being. When my grandfather passed, it was the first time my brother and I were left home alone. We were in high school. They went off to take care of business. They came back, life went on. There was no memorial, no funeral, nothing. Later, I was with my mother in 2006 when her husband passed, her second husband, and they both followed Joel Goldsmith in Infinite Way, and they both came out of Christian Science. So when he passed, my mother treated it much the same way. He passed around 3 or 4 in the morning. She wanted the coroner to come in the dark, take him away in the dark, not turn on the lights. She did not want the neighbors to know he had died. So I was like, I was the one crying. She was like, let's just get this done, get him, let's go on with life. I was like, okay. So I realized from reading this, I got a better understanding of where that attitude comes from. And so this was my background when I arrived in New Mexico. And it was a stark contrast to this idea of celebrating Dia de los Muertos. When we celebrate Dia de los Muertos, there were altars made to the people who had passed. There was food offered. Dates were mentioned. The date they actually passed was put out there. And I found that very interesting and uplifting. I looked at that, and so I decided to research a little bit about Dia de los Muertos. Now, some of you probably already know this, but I didn't. It has its roots in Aztec, Mayan, and Toltec origins over 3,000 years in the past. And originally it was celebrated in the summer. But when the Spaniards came into Mexico, it got shifted into the fall to align with All Saints' Day. And so now on November 1st, we honor the children who have passed, and then on November 2nd, we honor the adults who have passed. But what was emphasized here was that, again, the focus is on the life and the idea that new life comes out of death. The focus isn't on death. They emphasize a lot. This isn't a morbid ritual. This is a focus on life and honoring life and keeping the ancestors alive. Now, I don't know if you saw the movie Coco, and I've been told it's in alignment with this teaching. I learned a lot about the idea that not only could you have a physical death, but if you're not remembered, if you're not honored, if your picture isn't on the altar, you could actually have a spiritual death in a way and go into oblivion as opposed to being kept alive. So that was an interesting concept for me to think about in terms of, again, if we are to be here now, what is the reasoning then for remembering these ancestors, honoring them as part of our past? And I started to realize that it brings us all together. We talk about being all one, and it makes sense that we're still one with all of our ancestors, whether they're walking around in the flesh or not. And it brings them into the present. The altar has food on it because the spirit of our ancestors is communing with us during this ceremony. We brought them back into our reality in the here and now. And so I realized, too, this is an opportunity to look at our lessons that we've gained from the past and to bring a greater depth into our present. Ernest Holmes talks about the knowledge of the ages and the one mind that contains all that has ever been. And we have access to that. And celebrating and honoring our ancestors is one way to remember that and and to tap into that knowledge. So we look to the past not to dwell on what didn't work, but to honor what has worked and what we want to bring into our present. Consider why it is that we still read Greek philosophers, the teachings of Jesus, the Upanishads, the teachings of Buddha. Why we read Mary Baker Eddy, Emma Curtis Hopkins, the Fillmores and Holmes. They're all our ancestors. But we still read them to bring their awareness into our present. And I'm always at awe when I read their writings at how much they already knew that somehow I've forgotten. And so reading them brings it into my present. It makes it real for me today. So I started picturing it. I'm very visual. I do sign language, most of you know, and you see my hands flying. I picture a timeline. The past over here, myself in the middle, and the future over here. And we often think of a timeline as being a straight line. But then I started to see this. The past is informing my feelings, my gut. The past is what brings into me things that might still serve me and things that don't, but they impact how I feel in the present. And then that impacts my beliefs, what's going on in my mind, and how I create my future. So it's here, instead of a straight line, it's all right here, right now, in the present. And so I started to think about Ernest Holmes' idea of spiraling ever upward. That's what this looked like to me. And the words both and kept coming to me. That we can honor our past, plan for our future, and be here now. We bring it all in to one place. It's all part of what's happening simultaneously right now in our now. So what difference does it really make in terms of how we treat our past, how we think about what's happened in the past or those who have gone before us? And what difference does it really make what we believe about our future and where we're going between now and death and after death? Well, I started thinking about it this way. If my soul, if my essence is evolving ever upward, and I thought about what Charles Fillmore said also, I pictured kindergarten through graduation, whether it's high school or college. And I don't want to keep doing kindergarten over and over and over. I want to start getting through as many grades as I possibly can so I can graduate. Like he said, reincarnation is only important as long as we need to keep learning these lessons. So I realized that what we believe impacts how we behave. The choices that we make right now, in the now. In New Thought, I've noticed, and I think also in our culture in general, we kind of go, when it comes to death, we don't want to talk about it, we don't want to think about it. We use words like they transitioned, they passed on, they went over the Rainbow Bridge. But we don't want to say the person died because it sounds too finite for something we believe continues on, is evolutionary or is eternal. And so as I thought about this time of year, as we're moving toward Dia de los Muertos, and the idea of death being a springboard for more life, I thought there's a lesson there and a way that it's embraced as opposed to, let's not even talk about it or look at it. In the Buddhist approach, life and death are seen as one whole, where death is the beginning of another chapter of life. And death is a mirror in which the entire meaning of life is reflected. I liked that. Death is the mirror in which the whole meaning of life is reflected. And I got that out of the Tibetan book of Living and Dying. Very interesting, again, another book if you're interested in the topic to delve into. And I realized, bless you, James. I realized that some of these ideas are moving not just within the spiritual communities, but they're moving out into the mainstream. I found an article by Huffington Post called "The 5 Reasons You Won't Die" by Robert Lanza. So again, if you want to read the whole thing, it's called "The 5 Reasons You Will Not Die," and it's from Huffington Post. The second reason that he gave has to do with the conservation of energy, a fundamental axiom of science. The idea, the first law of thermodynamics states that energy can't be created or destroyed, it can only change form. So I looked up that law of conservation, and again, the law means that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, rather it can be transformed or transferred from one form to another. And so I thought about that energy. First of all, we're talking about heat or energy. We have that in our bodies. And I thought about the energy then and how it's transformed as we move through life. So I encourage you not to shy away from this topic of death, especially at this time of year, but to ponder and contemplate. Read what the others have said. Read more about Fillmore. Read the chapter from Ernest Holmes. And then spend time contemplating what you believe. What do you hope for? How do you want to experience the rest of your life and your transition? I used to work in a nursing home for 3 years, right out of college. And I spent a lot of time sitting with people who die, as Reverend Randy does now, at hospice. And I learned a lot. It was a wonderful experience. It was far from depressing. It was very uplifting. But what I started to see is that people die the way they live. And what I mean by that is, if the person tends to be very introverted, they tend to wait till everyone leaves and then they die, which frustrates some families. If the person loved having their family around and likes a lot of that energy, they wait till everyone is gathered and then they die. And so I would encourage families to think about how the person in their life lived to better honor how they would be ready to pass. Because, again, I believe people die the way they live. And so given that, and considering that we create our future, we're co-creators in the now of our future, how are you living? How are you formulating your life in the now that's going to inform your future transition? In the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, again, the peaceful death is really an essential human right. More essential, perhaps, even than the right to vote or the right to justice. It is a right on which all religious traditions tell us a great deal depends for the well-being and spiritual future of the dying person. There is no greater gift of charity you can give than helping a person die well. Randy's in agreement. It is an amazing thing. I thought again about Myrtle Fillmore, and her story was that she really knew her time was coming. She went around and tied up loose ends, said goodbye to everybody she worked with, said goodbye to her family, let them know it's coming, and then she peacefully transitioned. That's the role model that I want. I want that peaceful understanding, confidence, and ability to just tie up loose ends and let myself go. So I think the important thing is to be aware of the fact that our past, things that have happened in our past, including in our ancestors' lives, can impact our now, and they can impact in a positive way, and they can impact in a way that we might not be as comfortable with. And what we do with that helps to inform how we create where we're going, how we create between here and when we pass and beyond. And so a greater awareness of what has happened in the past, and a greater awareness of the truth of who we are, can help us then to release what isn't serving us. It can help us to heal and transform and reveal more of the truth. Ernest Holmes said there's nothing to heal, only something to be revealed. And I believe that's what Charles Fillmore was aiming for too, to reveal a greater truth of who he was. In the Science of Mind magazine for this month, and I will say, the Unity magazine, I get that at home, and I love it. I love it. I love the stories. They're wonderful. So I put in a plug for that as well as this. They're very similar, the Science of Mind magazine. So both of them can just serve to enhance your experience as you do your own personal practice. In this magazine for October are a lot of articles that I found related to this topic. And I just didn't have time to share all of it with you. So I again encourage both of those as ways to delve deeper this month if you'd like to read more. In here is an article that the woman says, every real or imagined trauma that has ever occurred in our lives is within if we haven't yet metabolized it. And it can be passed from generation to generations. I love that idea of metabolizing the traumas of our past. Instead of it being a lump in our gut that we carry around, seeing it metabolized. She said, the shadows aren't evil or bad, they are merely the places where distortions reside until the bright light of awareness reveals and alchemizes them. And then again, in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, they say, the masters tell us that we should die peacefully, without grasping, yearning, and attachment. This cannot fully happen if the unfinished business of a lifetime, as far as possible, is not cleared. And so we're looking at then this idea of what are we doing in the now with our past in order to clear and metabolize for a better future. As students of New Thought, of students of Unity or religious science or Joel Goldsmith's Infinite Way, as students of New Thought, we can begin this work right now. This is when we begin it. It's not the reward later, it's right now. And we can do that work with licensed teachers, with licensed practitioners, with ministers, or we can take the time to do the journaling and introspection and contemplation on our own. But we begin the work now. And I know that Reverend Pat Conway will be speaking to you the last Sunday of the month, so you guys are getting back in time for this, on the metaphysical meaning of Dia de los Muertos. She and I sat down and hashed through a lot of these concepts. And I know she'll be looking more at how do you transform your past. And next week I have a second part to this talk that I will be doing, also looking at how do we transform, metabolize the traumas of the past so we can make better choices in the present as we move into the future. So since we know that our energy never dies, think about the energy that you're creating with your thoughts. Think about the energy that you're creating as you carry your past stories. What are your past stories? Think about the energy that you're creating right now in your present, and think about what that energy is going to look like in your future. What I've started to realize is there's no way out. The only way is through transforming what is there. I can't just die and be done with it. I don't believe that anymore. I believe I have to start that transformational process now if I want to have a better now and future. We change our thinking. We evolve ever forward and upward. And we get more in alignment with that Christ consciousness, the truth of who we are, and allow that to be greater revealed in our present life. So this month I encourage you all, since it's fall, to think about, take an inventory of what you've planted, what you've been growing in your consciousness. What has been there from the past that keeps coming back perennially every year? What have you put in there? And what are you wanting to harvest to keep so it can nurture and feed you into your future? And what is chaff that you just want to get rid of? Or what needs to be composted and transformed into something even better? I am going to close this by quoting some words that Reverend Randy posted on his Facebook page. I knew that would get him. He was going to be here doing the music when I said this either. He said, "Don't strew me with roses after I'm dead. When death claims the light of my brow, no flowers of life will cheer me then. Instead, you may give me my roses now. Yeah. And to answer our original question, where have I been and where am I going in a be here now world? I'm quoting from Ernest Holmes's Beverly Hills lectures. These are fun. He said, "You come from where you are going to, and there is nowhere to go because you are already there." And so it is. So we're going to move into a meditation. I encourage you just to think about, take yourself into that space where you consider, first of all, your ancestors, those who you want to honor and bring forward. Just allow a visual of them to come into your mind's eye. And consider those who we call ancestors, who you might not have been physically related to, but who have had a great influence in your life. Those who have gone before, whose knowledge is still feeding you today. And allow your heart to open to those lessons, to the awareness that they are still part of who you are. And as your heart opens, allow it to fill with the love that you want to experience in the present. Feel that love move in and through every cell of your being. That is the truth of that Christ consciousness that brings life into every cell. Feel it move in and through every aspect of your being. Any trauma from your past that is sitting like a lump in your belly, move it into your heart and let it be dissolved, metabolized by love. Transforming into something that can serve and support you as you make better choices in the here and now. Brighter, you get to choose how you move through life and how you move through the transition called death. and light that has the continuity of life, the energy that never dies. So take that thought into heart.